Hello, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. I know I'm always super excited, but we are live. Welcome back to a Can We Talk Executive Conversations. My name is Tamiko Drummond, CEO of Lotus Consulting and Marketing. And I'm going to pass it over to my co-host over there, Mr. Lawrence Henderson in the building.
What's up, everybody? How's it going? You know it's me, Lawrence Henderson, boss with the sauce. Always ready and willing to run my mouth about something. So I'm excited about today, y'all. Y'all have no idea how excited I am because we have with us for this Can We Talk segment around leadership and life. We have Executive Vice President, Chief Culture Officer, Dr. DeRetta Rhodes.
Hello, everybody. So glad to be here with you.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being here with us, DeRetta. And again, just a little bit of background for the folks out there. If you don't know, you need to Google her. And more than likely, one of her TED Talks will come up. But as the EVP, yes, you heard me say that, Executive Vice President and Chief Culture Officer for the Atlanta Braves, the World Series champion Atlanta Braves. And just her career extends over 20 plus years as a leader in the HR and people capital space in the greater Atlanta area, and just a myriad of industries, organizations from the YMCA to First Data to Turner Broadcasting. She has been in the mix, moving, shaking, and making sure people are supported in every stretch of the imagination. But as we think about why we started these conversations in the first place, Tamiko, I'll throw it over to you. Why do we want to have executive conversations?
Listen, we wanted to have executive conversations because who doesn't want to pick the brain of an executive? If you want to be there, who else to ask than somebody who's already there so that we know what the steps are. How did they get there? What are they doing? How are they impacting people? And who are they helping to mentor or get into those rooms where they usually will not be able to go into. So we're super excited to have Dr. DeRetta Rhodes with us today. And thank you so much again for joining us.
You all are way too kind. So way too kind. So thank you for having me. Thank you for asking me to join you. It is a humbling experience for me. So I'm glad to be here to talk with you all and your audience.
And just to get us started off, of course, we called it executive conversations, but through your career and up to this point, DeRetta, what does being an executive even mean to you?
Well, that's a great question. And it's so funny because I don't know if I've thought of myself as an executive. I think what has happened and what I have been very blessed to have happen to me is that I had the right opportunities at the right time. And I worked really hard. I have a really good friend of mine that said, oh, you know, you work. I have worked really, really hard, whether it was work, where it was academics, whatever it was. I really worked. And that whole mindset of that probably came from my grandmother and my mother, and around making sure you show excellence in everything that you do. And I think what that has done is allowed me the opportunity to move forward, for people to see me and support me. And I've had individuals that have sponsored me that I didn't know sponsored me. And I've had people that have mentored me openly and outwardly. And I think that's what's made the difference. And so I can't say to you, when I started my career, I was like, oh, I know I want to be an EVP. I will tell you, I've always thought about the fact I wanted to grow and I wanted to get to the next step and I wanted to make impact. And so that was always the thing that was so important to me. It wasn't necessarily about the title, because you can lose the title at any given moment. It was about actually being able to have an opportunity to influence and make a difference.
That's so good. Mm-hmm. That is so awesome. Now, speaking of sponsors, right? What do you think that sponsors typically look for, that characteristic that you believe that they see or think a leader should possess, where they're like, you know what, I think this person has potential?
So I think a lot of times it's around accountability, it's around responsibility, it's around taking risks. I tell you the funniest story. I had the opportunity when I was at Turner Broadcasting. I got a phone call and I was supporting one part of the organization at the time, our technology organization. And I got a phone call and it was one of our leaders who said, we'd like for you to go on assignment to Hong Kong. And so I was like, oh, okay, great. So I get off the phone because, mind you, at this point in time in my life, I was a single mother with 2 sons who played baseball and I had a dog. And so the whole concept of trying to figure this out really stuck with me. So the first person that I called, which is my village, was my dad. So I called my dad and I said, listen, I have this great opportunity. I don't know how I'm going to make it work. And so my parents now live in North Carolina. And at the time they did at that point too. And my dad said, we'll figure it out. You need to take the assignment. We'll figure out what happens with Cole and Austin and Sassy. You take the assignment and we'll go through that. And it's so funny. I took the assignment. I started in about May. I didn't finish that assignment until about October, November, December timeframe. And as I was going through this, my oldest turned 16. So he was driving and trying to get his driver's license. I also had them, they were in baseball. They played baseball all of their career since they were 5. And so I had a village that took care of them those days and times and weeks that I was in Hong Kong. And I am so glad I took that opportunity. And those are the type of things when I think about, it was a risk. It was a huge risk. And coming out of that, had I not had that experience, I don't think that I would view things the way that I do, with the lens that's very different when you end up having a global assignment. So those are the type of things that I talk about with people. Take risks that don't feel comfortable, because within that discomfort comes growth, and you never know what's going to happen on the other end of that. So that's one of the things I think that ended up being really important to me, that although it's uncomfortable, and trust me, I have set an uncomfort that most of us probably have in the last 2 years, starting in 2020 and now. And it really has been around where the growth has met the discomfort, and it has helped me be a better person and a better leader.
Mm-hmm. And it's and I love that you're talking about that experience, right? That getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and really going for it and leaning into it. But when you think back along your journey, I'm sure you've met thousands of amazing leaders. Like, who can you pinpoint that had a tremendous impact on you in your career?
So this is, I have 3 specifically that I have to speak to. And it's interesting because all 3 of them were in my career at different times. So a gentleman who now is, I consider him not only my mentor, but a friend. And Rodney Whitmore was the first person that gave me my first human resources job out of grad school. So coming out of Clark Atlanta University, it was with Pepsi, a division of PepsiCo. It was Pizza Hut. And he was absolutely amazing. And the one thing we never wanted to do with Rodney was disappoint him. So I remember when this was like my first leadership job. This is the first time I had people working for me. I had this huge region. I was supporting all of these Pizza Hut restaurants. And I'll never forget, there was something that I did inappropriately on my expense report. This is important. I was expensing something I had no business expensing. So I'll never forget walking into his office, and he set me down. And anytime Rodney would start a conversation with, I'm surprised, you know, the rest of that conversation wasn't going well. So when he starts, I'm surprised, I was like, oh. And so, but the wonderful news about that is that he was willing to teach and admonish and give me feedback and make me a better leader as a result of that. I will assure you, I never did what I did on the expense report ever again. And some of it was just ignorance. Some of it was just, but he was willing to work with me on that. So that was my early part of my career. Then in the mid part of my career, where I was trying to make a decision of going out of human resources and taking a position with Ernst & Young, and it was specifically around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the concern I had was that I didn't want to be pigeonholed into a role as a Black female, so I come out as the poster person for diversity. And I had a gentleman by the name of Vince Diploma, who was one of the division presidents for ADP. And I'll never forget the conversations. And the care and nurturing that he gave to me. And what I learned from him more so than anything else was being very principled in your leadership. So there are times where you may not want to have that conversation, but you know you need to. And he really guided me along that, especially in this particular area. Vince DePalma will tell you, and I tell him every time, if I ever have an opportunity to go work for him again, I would. He's a president of an organization called Soft Choice out of Canada. And he is from New York. And it's so funny. We would have these conversations, and it was always he's very straight-laced, he's very serious, but you knew that he cared about you as a leader. And then my other leader that I absolutely think of, and I think of her because she was the one that really showed me the embodiment of grace and leadership. And I'll never forget, I was having a really bad day. And this is probably a little bit more than just a midpoint of my career. And it was a really bad day. I had gotten really, really tough feedback. And she calls me, she says, well, how did the meeting go? And I said, it didn't go well. And she said, then you need to just go home. And I'm like, and her name was Irie Jenkins. I was like, Irie, I can't just go home. She said, yes, you can. You call up, you say, listen, I need to go home. And what you need to do is you need to refresh, come back to fight another day. And so when I put all of those three things together that these amazing leaders have done for me in my career, it's hard for me not to want to be able to give back to that because they didn't have to do that. And I have many others, but those are the three that have been so impactful in terms of stages of my career and how it really transformed me to get to the next level.
Wow, that's so important to have those people in place, and I'm glad you did. So kudos to them, eh?
And sometimes, you know what's so funny about that? Sometimes you don't even realize it's happening.
Right.
It just becomes a connection or a relationship. And this is the one thing I really talk to people about. Make those connections and have them stick. You know, like don't meet someone and then figure out, oh, I'll call you 15 years later if I need something because I know you're at XYZ. It's so important to cultivate those. And I have been so blessed because I think with every opportunity that's come along or anyone that's called me and said, we've heard about you, we really would like for you to be a part of our board, or we'd like for you to be a part of a project with us. It has all to do with the relationships I feel like, and I hope that I've cultivated along the years.
That's so awesome because relationships are super important. What are some of the most important decisions you've had to make as a leader?
Wow. So, you know, it's interesting. I think there are a few. One of them is having to make a decision at what point in time you need to walk away from something. The second one is making the decision when you should take a risk, like the example of me going to Hong Kong. And the other one is when you have to make a decision to push forward and it's not a favorable conversation or initiative or whatever the case may be. So I think those are the three things that become very important and that actually, for me, become these markers in your career in terms of really being a watershed moment or whatever it is in the face of what's going on. I think the hardest one is trying to figure out when it's time to let go. That's the hardest one. And then, of course, the other one's kind of pushing forward and doing things that aren't necessarily comfortable or favorable.
Wow.
Yeah, that's huge because as I'm thinking about it, it's really, coming to a place of, is this for me? Is this my work? And that's what's coming up for me. And then again, the song popped in my head, know when to hold on. No, like that.
I know that song.
Right. That was coming up for me. But when you think about just your role within the organization and throughout the years, how do you ensure your organization and its activities stay in alignment with who you are, core values, and all those things?
So that's a tough one because I think in the role that I've had and the roles I have had in human resources, I always make the comment is that you are the conscience of an organization. So things that are happening, you possibly are the only one that's going to bring it up about it being a concern or issue or trying to protect the organization in such a way that people feel safe. And so I've done that from my role of HR, but the other roles that I've had in diversity, equity, and inclusion, it also is making sure that there's voice provided for those individuals that don't have voice in a room. So when I think about that, and Lawrence, it's a great question about my core values. The thing that's really important to me is transparency, vulnerability, and accountability. And I think I learned that specifically from my grandmother. So I'm so blessed to have the history of the women that are in my family. My grandmother was a kindergarten school teacher in a small town in Arkansas, and she had her undergraduate degree from University of Pine Bluff. My great aunt, which was her sister, had the same thing. I have a mother who I watched get her master's degree. And so one of the things I think that they all taught me was around resiliency, but also understanding who you are. You always know who you are. So the reality is that regardless of what happens in any circumstance, when I walk in a room, and I make this comment, and people don't a lot of people get very offended, but the first thing you see is the body bag I sit in. So the first thing that you see is that I'm a Black female. And I can't run from that. That's that piece of of who I am. And then what was also important to me was the education part. So I always thought it critical for me to have credibility. And in my mind and how I was raised, credibility equated to education. And so that was another thing for me that was really critical. And it was never about, oh, let me say I have an MBA. Let me say I have a PhD. It was never about that. I don't care about those things because people don't assign that to you. What they assign to you is how you have worked with them, how you have made them feel, as Maya Angelou would say. That's what they assign to you. They don't assign titles to you. And I think that's been really important to me. And so I've always had that, like I've had my grandmother sitting on my shoulder, reminding me of things when I would be in circumstances or situations. And so I guess for me, it has just come down to making sure, what am I doing and what am I imparting to make other people better? And what can I do to make that happen?
So we have, as a people, right, have gone through a lot these past few years. So you have the pandemic, you have systemic racism. Then as an HR professional, having to pivot during COVID, people are working from home and all these different things that people didn't have to really deal with before that we're now faced with or had to deal with. What do you think the biggest challenge is facing leaders today? So we've gone through COVID, or it's still there, but is there another big challenge that's facing leaders today?
So I think the biggest challenge, and I speak to this specifically for myself because I'm not going to put this on anyone else. To what Lawrence said, I have probably 30 years of HR experience. And one of the things in all of my career that I never really focused on until 24 months ago was wellness and mindfulness. Mm-hmm. So I think what you're finding is that there's this expectation now that leaders and organizations have to take this mantle of that you have a whole person that actually comes to work. And the realization of that whole person manifested itself during COVID. Mm-hmm. So when individuals had to shift and go home and stay home, every boundary that could have been was blurred. So the boundary of family and work, the boundary of schooling your children and having them at home with you while you're working, the boundary of some of us that had to deal with elderly parents at that time. And so at that point, and mind you, work was so blurred, people were sitting at their kitchen tables when they first started, or their dining room tables. They hadn't had a space to set up. And there became this encroachment that everyone began to face and feel, and they didn't feel like they actually could be their own selves anymore. And so I always talked about, oh, we've got EAP and you all can call that number. But when we shifted to working from home, and we were not, and are still not, as a baseball team, a environment to work from home, we really had to, especially my people capital team, we really had to start thinking about measures, approaches, partnering with our healthcare partner, partnering with other organizations to help us do a better job of really being focused on mindfulness. One of the things that we also created during this time is a wellness room. And so I kind of call it a Zen room. So anybody can sign up for it. It doesn't matter. It's a room that you can go to. And this is really critical. All of a sudden, telemed became much more important than it had ever been before. So the opportunity for people to be able to come back to work, do their telemed meetings or do their telemed appointments in the wellness room became so critically important. And I will tell you, as a leader that is focused on people, that was a huge miss that I made throughout my career.
Nice. It's funny, and I love that you brought that part of personal development and personal care up, because over this past several years, I think for all of us who are capable, right now, I love the post. I always say check on your strong friends. And when you started looking inwardly, like you said, the lines were blurred like never before, right? You could morph into whoever you were or who you needed to be on the drive home, right, to and from work. You could put on the different hats, but as it got blurred, those challenges of deciphering what was real and what wasn't really became unclear. So I appreciate you definitely pointing that out. But as you think about your development journey, how has the development of leaders for today and tomorrow, how has that changed?
Oh, I think that's changed dramatically. I think, I don't think it's necessarily the traditional certificate, the traditional training that you have normally seen. I think that's important because it informs situations and circumstances. I think experiences are the ones that organizations are shifting to. When we talk about succession planning and you think about, okay, when you put names on a grid and what they've gone through, it's been very easy to say they've taken this training or this training, but now it's critically important to say what experiences have they had and how have they worked with different teams? How have they worked with multicultural teams? How have they been influential with making sure that there's community that's created within their teams? That's not always a trainable event. And so I think when you start thinking about the development of leaders, it is a holistic approach to a leader. So you need a leader to be healthy and well, both mentally, both physically, and both intellectually. And I think you're going to start seeing a huge focus on that, the holistic leader, and what are we doing to make sure that we're feeding and that we're developing the holistic leader.
That's good. So how do you develop a holistic leader? Like, what are some resources you can kind of throw out there or that you would recommend to someone who's thinking about becoming, maybe they're going into a leadership role for the first time, or maybe someone who just wants to be a better leader?
So I will tell you, as a person who loves assessments, let's start there. So I think the whole concept of awareness and self-awareness is critically important. So I think having assessments and getting assessments, constantly asking for feedback. If you have a team, you need to do one-on-ones with each one of those individuals, and you need to speak to them about what feedback can you give me today and talk with them about what's going on with them. The other thing that I think is so highly influential in terms of development for leaders is executive coaches. Get an executive coach that can help you identify the areas with which you may find as blind spots, because I think the biggest challenge for leaders is for them not to see themselves as others are seeing them. Because what happens is, if you're not, it's that whole concept of the Johari window. If you're only letting people in here, then what happens is you miss out on an opportunity of growth and development, not just for your staff, but for you. So opening that window up and having the opportunity to have it being broader around yourself, and then you being able to bring a team back in. So that, to me, that's that's a huge part of it. The one thing that we may not have talked about years and years ago, which is much more prevalent now, is what's your EQ? What is your emotional intelligence around things that are happening? And it's so funny. I'm very aware of mine, and I'm very aware of what I need with people around me for them to say certain things or to get me in a mindset, because I'm a very process focused person. And so I have to have people that are around me that are very people focused. And so, and it's funny because people are like, well, you're in HR, aren't you people focused? Well, that's a whole conversation for another day.
Right.
But the thing is that if my focus is around process, and processes are equitable and that they're fair, then that's where I sit all the time. I need somebody to come in and talk to me about being people focused and how that impacts individuals in the organization. And so I try to surround myself around people that can and will do that. It's not that I'm abdicating that away. I'm not doing that. But I am having somebody remind me of that so that I can make sure that I put that in place. That's what really good leaders need, good to great leaders need to do. You need to make sure you know yourself, you know your own triggers, and how when these triggers happen, you're able to have people around you to let you know about them, but then yourself being able to self-regulate those triggers as well.
Wow, thank you for teeing that up. And it was almost like you was in class with me today. One of my buddies came in, Nick Dillon, and he was having this conversation with my students and talking about how entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. And one of the things that he brought up was really this critical development skill, whether it's entrepreneur or a leader, around emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And not just that awareness part that you described, but the management, not to shut a room down, trying to, I know I'm a processor. You easily could. I'm a process-oriented person. Give me my stuff, and then I'll care about you later, right? But having somebody with you as a collaborator to say, hey, DeRetta, check in. There are people involved in this process. So and so just to have that banter, and when you think about just going back maybe sometime or even recently, thinking about emotional intelligence, thinking about awareness, what is one mistake maybe you witnessed or you observed or were told about where a leader, the frequency in them continuing to make similar mistakes? What's that one?
So that's a great question. And it's interesting because I think the biggest mistake that we as leaders, and I'm going to put myself in the same category, that we oftentimes make is that we're not willing to make a decision on a person that's not a fit. What we'll do is we'll make excuses for it. We will say, oh, let me give them this amount of time. It's so interesting to me because I can't tell you that I haven't made that mistake before. But I've had a mentor say to me that probably is the biggest mistake that leaders make at executive levels, at senior levels, and mid-manager levels. We wait too long to make a decision on a person. And a lot of times we wait too long because we don't want to confront the issue, because it's a tough conversation to have. We are so empathetic to that individual. We don't understand the impact that it's making on the team and the organization. Or sometimes we just don't like to give bad feedback. And so I think what happens with that, and I have two examples. So if I were to be cut by a knife, I don't want to be cut by a jagged knife, one that's all cut up and it's jagged and your skin will get caught. I want to be cut by a very clean, sharp knife because the healing process is quicker and, believe it or not, easier. So when you don't make those decisions in a timely manner, you are impacting productivity, you're impacting morale, and oftentimes you're probably impacting your own engagement in the organization. And that to me has been the hardest thing. And not only do I coach people around that, but I have to remind myself around that too, because sometimes it is the most difficult thing to do, but you don't understand how critical that is for you to make a pivot quickly, not only for the individual, but also for your team and the organization.
That's huge. Death by a thousand paper cuts, right?
Right. Right. It's very painful.
Very painful.
Wow. DeRetta, I wanted to ask you this. So the buzz now is Web 3.0 and the metaverse. Is by any chance your organization figuring out ways to use like virtual reality or bring technology in? And how are you all using that?
That's a great question. And we actually are in a project right now working with an organization on how do we bring the fan experience to someone virtual. So it is about, if you can't come to the game, what can I do to make you feel like you're sitting at the game? So what are the things that you have to do? And we actually have the schematic of the Truist Stadium and the actual seats and what those seats actually look like when you're sitting there, and what it would look like if a host or hostess took you to your seats, and what would it look like if somebody came to give you a beer and all. So it really has, so to that extent, absolutely, there's something to be said about the experience and the alignment thread for a fan in any way they can get sports. And so because of that, we definitely are in that arena of where we're trying to make sure that we are not only cutting edge, but leading edge around that, so that we can make sure that that experience gets to come to everyone. And we're in a very unique place. So to what Lauren said earlier, being the world champions at this point,
Right.
taking advantage of what that experience is like to come into the Truist ballpark, or to go to the Battery and kind of hang out in the Battery, go to Fat Tuesdays, get a drink, walk over to, Burn, if you like cigars, smoke a cigar. So that whole entire experience, we are making it virtual for people.
Wow.
Yeah, that's huge, because you think and almost every organization has the value of creativity on the wall. But how do you, in this ever evolving world, how do you encourage creative thinking within your team and the organization?
So I think it's around engagement. I mean, how do people get engaged? I have this conversation with people all the time. Like, I want to understand what motivates you. And so if you're having the conversation with individuals about what motivates you, and you're able to, so I now have a larger team because my role expanded, and I support not only people capital, which is HR, but I have community affairs. I have our Atlanta Braves Foundation, and I also have corporate communications. So as I was bringing this team together and we were talking about culture, one of the things that we talked about that I wanted to know about everybody that became a part of this holistic team was what motivates you. And actually you telling everybody around the room what motivates you, because I think when you have that understanding from someone, it really makes it easier for you to engage them in such a way that they want to rush to work as opposed to rush home. And so I really think about that from that standpoint. It's funny, when we had our first team meeting, what I did is I provided them the book. I love Dr. Seuss. I know there's issues with Dr. Seuss, but I grew up on Dr. Seuss. I love Dr. Seuss, and the book that I love is All the Places You Will Go. And so I gave everybody a copy of that book. And for me, it's metaphorical. It is around the fact that you now sit on a new team, and I want you all to think about where are all the places that we as a team will go, but you as an individual will go. And I have those one-on-one conversations with people so I can understand that, and so that we can bring it together so that they feel like they are part of a community that cares about them and cares about their motivation and their engagement.
That is really good. I actually never read that book, so I'm gonna.
I'll send you one. I keep copies.
Really?
Yes, ma'am. I keep copies of them because I also, if I'm mentoring someone and they got promoted, I give them that book as well. So yes, I keep copies of that book. I will send you one. You will love it.
Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating. Absolutely, it's the best.
Thank you so much. As we're wrapping up, you started off talking about who's influenced you through your career. And you just mentioned that you have mentees. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
So, as a leader, so you're now influencing others. What are you doing to stay current, to continue to grow and develop as a leader?
So, first of all, I love Brene Brown. Like, she is like, I have such a girl crush on her. And so, the one thing that I love that Brene Brown talks about in her books and what she speaks to is really the understanding of yourself as a leader and making sure that you have that. And so there's just so many instances I feel like in my career that I had this big S on my chest for shame. And she talks about this. And so I think for me, it is trying to always be reflective. It is about research. I absolutely love research. Like when she did her whole tech talk about, they were saying you're a researcher. She's something about pixie dust. I love it. And so I think I'm a researcher at heart. And so for me, I keep very steeped in what the research is out there. I just got through speaking with a doctoral candidate who I'm part of her research. I did an interview for her in her research. So when I have an opportunity to do that, I do. I just try to stay very connected with the research and what's going on out there. The other thing is all the popular information that's out there too. So you need to read the popular news. You need to know how to connect the dots with both of them. And so I do that as well. But it's funny. When I finished my last degree, my mother said, you're done. Like you can't get another one. And I was thinking, no, I can't get another one because I don't have any more money to get another one, number one. Number two, if I can just stay steeped in research, it helps me to inform the conversations that I'm having with people. And again, it's not about me saying, oh, I'm a SME or a subject matter expert. It's all about me being able to bring something to bear to a conversation that others may not have thought of. So I always, learning is a very important part of who I am. And so I try to keep very connected with that aspect.
Yeah, that's absolutely. I absolutely love that, and being on my own education journey, and I never fancied myself a researcher. I'm a big picture thinker, but there's so much information and to your point, DeRetta, is having access to the articles, to the latest and greatest information, and maybe it's not a new concept of leadership, but it's a new idea, it's a new theory, it's a new thought to put in your head around how has leadership evolved, and so that is a great tip. And again, Harvard Business Review, if you don't register or have that come into your email box, Forbes or whatever it is, just soaking up information is something that I find myself doing a lot of between papers. But it's one of those things I love doing. And so as we kind of close out today, if you could give somebody just two things to get them to take their first next step, and I'm asking Coach DeRetta, you can get somebody two things. Coach, what would your two things be for somebody to move past? Maybe they're stalled, maybe they're stuck, whatever it is. Two things. What would you give them?
So the first thing I would say is that you just have to keep moving forward. So resiliency is such an important part of everything. I think about even my doctoral journey, because I was told during while I was going through that process that I would never graduate by one of my professors. And one of the things that I told you I keep my grandmother, like she's right here, is my grandmother said, that's a lie. And so I think you have to be very careful of who you have talking to you, because we have our own records in our head, and so that typically are not positive. And so I think resiliency is very important. That's the first thing. Keep moving, get up every single day, even if that day wasn't the best day. That does not mean it was the worst day. And so if you think of it that way, keep moving forward. And also always remind yourself of who is truly, truly in your tribe, and making sure that those are the individuals that are talking positive into you and pouring into you, because we oftentimes and mostly all the time need that.
Wow. Keep moving forward, continue to be resilient, and know who is in your tribe. Those are super important. Super important. Thank you so much, Dr. DeRetta Rhodes, for joining us for Can We Talk Executive Conversations. Lawrence.
Yes, ma'am. Man.
How was that?
I got my Maxwell on over here. I mean, just dropping so many platinum nuggets. And again, I echo Tamiko. DeRetta, thank you so much. And every time we get together and I get the opportunity to host and ask you questions, I'm just always taken aback and blown away by your willingness just to share, just to give back. And again, definitely a heart of a servant, but also someone who, if you're going to be in DeRetta space, you better come correct. And so that's an expectation. You already heard it. She got it handed down to her. It's an expectation. Be excellent in all that you do. So again, thank you so much for your time, the gift of you, and just giving back to our audience. And so is there anything that you want to leave for the people, whether it's, come to a Braves game, anything you want to throw out there?
Opening day, April 7th. I expect to see everybody there. So we're just glad to be here with you all. And just thank you again. I'm just humbled that you even asked me to be a part of this. So thank you for having me. And I just wish everybody the best and to be and do your best every single day.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us again for Can We Talk Executive Conversations. We had an amazing time with Dr. DeRetta Rhodes from the Braves. Okay, go to opening day. Guess what? You will see us in 2 weeks, and we're super excited. It is time to go. Until next time, continue to follow, like, share, and thank you so much, Lawrence. Anything you want to add?
Be well, everyone. See you soon.
Goodbye, everyone.